Am I still there?
Hi, everyone, and welcome. We have a video to start. We'll give it a minute to play that. Okay, maybe the video isn't playing. We'll see if we can bring that back later. But anyway, thank you all for coming. We welcome everyone to Rohini Lakini Philanthropy's inaugural track for Charcha 2021. And I'm very grateful to all of you who have taken a substantial chunk of time out from your busy days to spend it with us on this journey over the next 3 days. Like the opening panel echoed, if there is one thing we have all learned over the past year, it is how interconnected we are and how visible this web has been made. We saw, cheered, and learned from the importance of horizontal solidarity of ordinary citizens when faced with the pandemic. Citizens were first responders, even as markets and states were limited in their ability to respond to the planetary scale and speed of the crisis. This idea that every problem is solvable and that every individual and organization can contribute to such change, as we saw it expressed in the early responses to the pandemic, is central to the odyssey of learning we're on, with a remarkable set of organizations engaged in the practice of active citizenship and public problem solving. We have learned so much from them, and that there is always more than one path to achieve systemic change, and that meaningful solutions emerge only through co-creation. Converging crises, or syndemics as I have learned they are called, require converging solutions that are unified but never uniform. This is why we are deeply invested in the idea of active citizenship and the emergent resilient societies it enables. And this is our invitation to all of you over the next 3 days. We cannot do it alone, and we cannot do it without embracing a deep curiosity to explore participatory systemic change. We have an exciting lineup for the next few days, ranging from funders to movie makers to grassroots media organizations to politicians. Without further ado, let me move into our first panel with the team at Arete Advisors. We have Anurati and Shraddha who join us. But before I do, a few short housekeeping rules. This session will run for 50 minutes. There are 2 windows, a chat window for conversations, which we encourage. Please feel free to ask questions, drop comments in, and a Q&A window for explicit questions that you would like Anurati and Shraddha to answer. Ask your questions throughout the conversation, and note that you can upvote questions to prioritize them. We'll take questions in the last 10 minutes of the session. Before I introduce the team from Arete, I wanted to give you some context on why we wanted to do this report. Over the last few years, we have come to see an incredible diversity and vibrant set of practices around the idea of active citizenship and public problem solving. Indeed, central to the idea that communities can be the heroes of their own stories. Indeed, that citizens can participate in problem solving and not merely receive governance, but co-create good governance. This is what we wanted to synthesize, both the theory of it as well as the practice of it. We also wanted to capture the field and cast of actors in this landscape, and that's what we will present to you today. Shraddha, over to you.
Thank you for that wonderful introduction, Gautam. I just want to just take a moment to say that it's really been very enriching personally to work in this space. While, like, I think we're all citizens, and therefore the space is very, very intuitive to all of us. But I think it's also a very nebulous sector or space to think about, trying to tie theory and practice together. We got to interact with some wonderful organizations, both within the R&P portfolio as well as outside the portfolio, that are trying to kind of bring, let's say, the theory, the concepts into action, and see how change happens on the ground when we enable communities. When we started thinking about, like how should Arete go, like how do we go about capturing the broader landscape? We kind of, I think, we started with 5 research questions. Yash, could you move to the next slide, please? And these were the 5 key questions, I think, that we thought that the report should try and answer. One is, like, what is active citizenship, and is it different from citizenship? How does active citizenship really enable resilient societies? And what does the Indian active citizenship space look like, at least as of, let's say, if I were to say at this moment in time, what does the landscape look like? Who are the different actors in this space, and how do they engage and where do they play? And what are the forces that are shaping the work in this space? And last, obviously, where do we go from here? And I think, Gautam, you've alluded to one and two in your introduction and setting up the context for what the track is about. I will not spend a lot of time talking about those, but today I want to kind of talk to our audience about questions three, four, and five. Uh, and kind of walk you through on what are the things that we have learned during our research and are continuing to learn as we polish and finalize the report. And I think if I were to just articulate a one line, what is our big goal for today? It is to just kind of bring to the surface how uh, nuanced and complex and multidimensional the work in the citizenship and governance space is. We looked at literature around governance, democracy, citizenship extensively, both within originating from India as well as outside India. And we also looked at, like, let's say, the landscape of organizations working in this space. We did a deep dive on about 50 of those organizations to kind of bring together what citizenship in action looks like. And while I think the broader ecosystem would be upwards of 400 to 500 organizations who are doing some very meaningful work. Next slide, please. And I come from a corporate background, so I think the who are the stakeholders and what are their motivations is kind of embedded in my own personal first principles thinking, and that's how we kind of approach the research problem as well. uh, we initially started with the hypothesis that if we kind of look at just Samaj, we will be able to arrive at a a good comprehensive picture of what the landscape looks like. But very quickly into our research, we realized that that will not present the complete picture, and like the system as a whole, like, is a delicate balance between Samaj, Sarkar, and Bazaar, and the field is extremely wide. It draws not just from governance and democracy, it draws from public policy, it draws from political economy, it draws from sociology and anthropology, and also, like, it speaks to the very core of who we are as individuals, our identity and our agency. And therefore, like we went back to the RNP framing of Samaj, Sarkar, and Bazaar being like the three foundational pillars, I think, and kind of looked at how they are enabled by a whole host of actors, right? While Sarkar obviously is one of the primary actors in this ecosystem, since they are responsible for uh, governance, and it's in the Sarkar's interest as well to kind of engage citizens. And we thought about Bazaar. Initially, our hypothesis was to think of Bazaar essentially in the funding context. But as we delved deeper, we realized that Bazaar itself has a lot of incentive to be a good citizen. And that, I think, is reflecting in a lot of the louder conversations we're hearing around sustainability, around ESG, around business for good. And these three are like supported immensely by a whole host of enabling actors, whether it's technology, which is really, really disrupting both our lives as like individuals as well as like institutionally on how we engage with different sectors. Funders, whether it's knowledge, research, just building like the knowledge in the field, whether it's the justice system or it's media, which kind of plays a huge role in both democratizing information as well as power to some extent by holding the government accountable and acting as a watchdog. And I think here, Gautam, like, it would be great to hear from you on how do you see the active citizenship portfolio, and like what is the Nilikani Philanthropy's thinking around active citizenship and how it plays into the whole Samaj, Sarkar, and Bazaar dynamic.
Thank you, Shraddha, for that overview of how we've been approaching this research. Something that both Mr. Kant and Rohini mentioned in the opening plenary was how Samaj is the first sector, and I think it's important for us to anchor this work in that. We believe that Samaj is the first sector, and that Samaj created both Bazaar and Sarkar for its own welfare. So, in that sense, what Samaj is also has to do as part of that compact is hold it both accountable to what we call the public good. Indeed, our endeavor is to create a good and just society, and we believe that anchoring all of this work in the strength and power of Samaj is important. Many years ago, Rohini had in one of her talks had made this statement about how good governance is not something good governance is not something that we should ask for. It is something that citizens need to co-create, and I think that was the start of this journey. How do citizens participate in solving the problem of the public? Public problem solving around, it doesn't matter whether it's at the level of your street, your city, or your nation state, but the idea that the engagement and participation on citizens is vital, not just along the electoral cycle, but in the daily experience of governance. Indeed, to co-create governance and to co-create solutions to our problems. That was kind of the genesis of this work of active citizenship. And also to distinguish our role as citizens from that of, say, us as customers of a market or subjects of a state. The anchoring of this work is in that identity, is in the identity of allowing individuals and civil society organizations and indeed Samaj to be or to be able to be the heroes of its own stories rather than expect others, whether it's this Sarkar or Bazaar, only to solve all the problems that we face. There is, of course, a more cross-cutting theme. We are all citizens. Whether, for example, we work in Samaj, Sarkar, or Bazaar, we have a fundamental identity as citizens. And sometimes solving our problems where we can transcend the hats we wear and reclaim the fundamental hats of citizenship and neighborliness to co-create solutions to our problems. So that's where we actually started this work. And then, of course, over the last few years, we've seen the tremendous ability of technology to both amplify and impede some of these journeys. And so we've been doing some work along with others to kind of unpack and understand the role of technology in this, the role of movement building, the role of amplification and knowledge, and all of these enabling pieces. And what we see is this very, very vibrant landscape that we can all build from. And fundamentally upholding this role of ours as active citizens in a dynamic republic and in a participatory democracy. So that's where we come from. And we've been really fortunate to work with an amazing set of actors across a range of geographies and areas of work and interest, and using different methodologies to be able to give voice and demonstrate the practice of active citizenship in public problem solving. I know you'll have much more detailed unpacking of this as we go ahead. So Anuradhi and Shraddha, if you'd like to go to that.
Yeah, thank you, Gautam. That was really nuanced. I just to go from here, I think while we will be focusing a lot of our conversation on the role of Samaj, and many of the sessions that follow our session today will delve deeper into some of the themes. But we will be discussing this confluence of Samaj with Sarkar and Bazaar in great detail in three other sessions. One is when we look at technology and active citizenship, which is the session called Citizenship as a Service. Then we have a session from a funder's perspective on how they think about funding work in this space, which is called Lift Karade. And then our session Uncommon Ground will delve deeper into how like we can maintain this balance between Samaj, Sarkar, and Bazaar. And today, just following this session, we have Hansal Mehta, who's a filmmaker, and Anushka Shah talking about films and active citizenship. And then later, we have Barkha Dutt, Meera Devi, and Dhanya Rajendran speaking on media and its role in active citizenship. Yash, could we please go to the next slide? Before I think we kind of start unpacking our findings, I just wanted to give everybody a lay of the land, so to speak. We've built on the framework that Rohini Nilekani Philanthropies and Apti Institute uh, kind of formulated in their report on technology in the service of citizenship, which came out last year, which kind of looked at citizenship, active citizenship across five dimensions on how citizens transact with the government. These are volunteering, co creation, electoral participation, claim making, and movement building. Volunteering is essentially when we give our resources and time and effort to a cause or to a CSO, and usually this is without expectation of payment. Co-creation is like what Gautam mentioned, right? Like when we take ownership of our communities and don't necessarily look towards sarkaar or bazaar to solve our problems, and we are solving our own communities' problems. That's co-creation. Electoral participation, I think we all understand intuitively. That's one of the rights, I think, which is intricately tied with the concept of citizenship. Then there is claim making, where we are asserting our voice and claiming our rights or entitlements from the government through systems and processes. And then there's movement building, where, like we're kind of voicing our opinions over policy changes that are coming in or any laws that are being announced. And I think some of this has been very, very real and for a lot of us over the last 18 to 24 months. And I think when we kind of started delving deeper, we realized that probably these are not watertight compartments. They It is a spectrum, and they all kind of bleed into each other and draw from each other as well. What we did was that we layered two questions on this framework, on saying what is the power dynamic between the citizen and the government across each of these five dimensions when they transact with each other. And the second, we looked at what were the incentives for citizens and government to engage with each other. And then, like this whole incentives and power dynamic construct, how does it influence the work that organizations are trying to do in this sector? So, with that, let me hand over to Anurati, who will now walk us all through some of the findings. Anurati, over to you.
Also, for everyone in the audience, just to note, there is a polls tab and we'll be running polls there. If you go on over to it, Anuradhi has one lined up for you.
Thank you, Shraddha. Thank you, Gautam. We thought that we would actually kick off this piece on the role of, on really kind of unpacking and deconstructing what the CSOs and social enterprises are doing with a quick poll. Can I request, Kriti, can you launch the poll, please? We'll give it 20 seconds to launch. I know we're all struggling with a new platform. Oh, there it is. It'll be really interesting to hear, because I think when the Arete team really started looking at this space, I think we came from some preconceived notions of what we would see, and so we're very curious to hear from the audience.
As you take the poll, just a reminder that you can put questions in the Q&A box and upvote existing questions if you feel strongly about any one of them.
I think we'll give it maybe another 20 seconds and then we can publish the results. Should we see where we are? And I hope I can.
So Anuradhi, there's a clear winner on this one. Volunteering has nearly 50% of the vote, followed by co-creation at about 30%.
See the screen. I can see a 14% somewhere.
So movement building is at 14%, co-creation is at about 29%, claim making at about 15%, and the
Is
winner
I'm
is,
not actually able to see the
Did we just lose
yeah,
Anuruti? I
yeah, I
think
think you
so.
did.
Yeah, but this is the results are a little in line with what I think as Arite we also went in with, where we did think. I'm surprised that the audience didn't think electoral participation, but our hypothesis was that like we would see a lot of people working in community organizing, like getting people out to vote and volunteering. But that's not the case. And we'll find out. Yash, could we go to the next slide, please? Yeah. All right. I'm going to wait for a couple of seconds for Anuriti to join back. I can see that Nikhil has a question for us, and I will try and answer that question. It's a very interesting question, saying, where do you think policy think tanks or impact consulting firms, where do they fit, and where do impact investors fit? I think this is a great question, Nikhil, and to answer it, I think what like you'll realize, like I don't know if you noticed, but knowledge I think is a key enabler for this space. And as while the research is really vast, I also and it's multi-sectoral, multi-dimensional. I do think there's still a dearth of actionable research in the sector. We like just before Chacha last week, we did an internal convening at RNP with the portfolio, and I think one of like the big uh, issues that came up in that discussion was, what does impact even look like? What does success look like in this space? And I think this is where a lot of the actors that you've mentioned kind of come in, and like they're helping build the knowledge both in the space, and also the impact investors obviously are providing a much more patient capital than, let's say, traditional equity would look like. So yeah, they're playing very important roles in this space. I think Anurati is back.
I was waiting for one of us to some kind of strong technical glitch. Just wanted to Shraddha, where did we get to?
No, we just I took a question from Nikhil. So yeah, the floor is yours.
Thank you. Okay, we'll give this another shot. So we really started the way we actually got into this piece, and like Shraddha mentioned, we started working on this thinking that Samaj would really give us a big answer, and so we explored actually a group of about 50 or so CSOs and social enterprises. And this was we came up with a list based on some extensive secondary research, and we actually, through our conversations with the portfolio, we were able to, add, edit, and remove. And we were very interested to really see what kind of work the organizations were doing. And I think the reason we wanted to actually share this with you is to give a flavor of really how deep and textured the work is, right? I also want to just reiterate a point that Shraddha and Gautam have made, which is that none of this is kind of set in stone. And so we really do encourage people to come in with different discussion points and debate on some of these pieces. So to start with, I think co-creation was really, really prominent. I think almost 50% of the organizations were working through the space, and this was a particularly interesting insight for us, because I think, at least I personally had gone in thinking that something like claim making would probably be more prominent. When we actually dissected co-creation further, we saw a couple of threads emerging, right? So one was saying there was a bunch of work, and nearly 50% of these organizations were working in capacity development through leadership. And there was a very wide variety of work happening here. So you have organizations like Coro, which are doing work on grassroots leadership development. And then you have organizations like the Indian School of Democracy, which are building leaders for politics. And they did this leadership development through different kinds of domain experience with domain building, with knowledge building, through building career capital for the leaders they were working with. There is another kind of interesting segment which is speaking to information and research. And this goes a little bit beyond. So of course there are organizations like CPR, like Oxfam, that are doing a lot of core policy work, but we also saw some very interesting players who were really working on sharing information. So I think a conversation and a player which has really stuck with us is we spoke with Bolti Band, which is a part of the RNP portfolio, and they do this incredible work on trying to reduce the growing binaries in the world today, and to really enable people to speak to each other. So they create conversations and forums that make this happen. I think the third part within co-creation, which is probably the smallest bucket, is on actually layering infrastructure or layering public goods onto what the government does. And a very clear example of this, of course, is the eGov Foundation, which really works on digitizing government processes in many ways, so that it essentially, they have many dimensions of their work, but a key part of it is to say, how do we create efficiencies and save time, so that a lot of grievances and other redressals can happen immediately. So this was what we discovered on the co-creation piece. We had an internal convening some time ago, and one of the questions that really came up was, why is there not more layering, and why are there not more public goods being made? And I think there's many answers to it, but probably one of them, and we'd love to hear from the audience on this as well, but one of them is probably around the challenges of a common good which needs to be really created for everyone and not just a specific audience. The second big piece is claim making. And claim making is really what Shraddha had called, which is asking the government for what our rights are. And there's kind of, I would say, there are many ways in which, of course, this also happens, but two prominent threads that we saw. There was a lot of work doing on making or the right to information process more efficient. And then there is a very interesting model on claiming welfare schemes from the government. So Hak Darshak, of course, is a very interesting example of this, where they go, for those who don't know the model, they actually go work in communities to ensure that citizens are able to get, through Hak Darshak, through people from the communities employed, to make sure that they get access to the welfare schemes they deserve. There are three other kind of slightly smaller clusters for us to discuss. Volunteering is a very intuitive one. This has been a very neutral way through which people have really showcased citizenship for a long time. It's also an interesting one because in many ways it has it can actually have minimal interface with the government. So a lot of volunteering that takes place is, citizen to citizen groups. The innovation that we're really seeing here around civil society organizations is in finding that many of them are trying to institutionalize the process, right? So you'll have iVolunteer, which has created an interface or a marketplace where people looking to volunteer their skills and those, it's essentially a marketplace. Another option, or another interesting one, of course, has been Reap Benefit. Reap Benefits has used some of their volunteers to actually create tech infrastructure for organizations to work with. There are two last pieces to talk about here. Electoral participation, we were actually really interested to see that there were fewer organizations that were working in this space. There were many hypotheses that were explored around this. One, of course, could be the prominence that electoral participation gets through our media, and that perhaps organizations felt that there was enough political mobilization that we didn't need to do it in a meaningful way. And this is interesting because we do see that turnout for elections, specifically national level, are fairly high for us. The second one, of course, could be that a lot of funders want to stay away from, politics, and that actually has a loop with how organizations function. And the third one was something really interesting, which we heard from a nonprofit, where they said, look, elections happen once a week. We focus on governance, which is a much longer process.
Thank you, Anuradhi. I was just wondering that, is there a construct of an archetypal organization that you all were able to distill from the landscaping that you all did? And I just want to also acknowledge the fact that this landscape is such a vibrant and giant tapestry that the value chain and the linkages don't always suggest themselves. But from what we've seen over our work is that there are many interesting possibilities of co-creation, collaboration within organizations. I just want to call out a few that we've seen in the past. So, for example, Reap Benefit and eGovernance Foundation have been collaborating on doing some work in bringing more of the citizen voice to government services and platforms. And similarly, there have been many such partnerships from within this ecosystem to leverage unique strengths and co-create new pathways forward to amplify citizens' agency and participation. But Anuradhi, Shraddha, would love to see what the distillation and the idea of an archetype might look like from your conversations and work.
Absolutely. If we can just move 2 slides down, we can talk about this very quickly. I think that the line on the top really talks about this. A typical organization from the ones we looked at work in urban settings. They deal with primarily 18 to 30-year-olds. They're gender and sector agnostic, and they work at the national scale. And I'll very quickly speak to perhaps some of the reasons and rationale that really drove this. So 84% of the organizations are working in urban areas, and this could actually be a function of connectivity in some ways. It could also be a function of a founder bias. So a lot of the founders that we've spoken to have been from cities, and hence that's what's led to it. Another interesting piece that came out was that there was limited gender intentionality so far. And I think this was something that we discussed at the convening as well. And I think the broad question is that it's recognized, but really what does a gender lens look like, right? So if technology is a powerful way in which solutions are being conducted, do we need to look at the user interface for men and women and create solutions accordingly? A third aspect of this was looking at the age group. And interesting because we've seen engagement at a slightly older age group than we see, which is 18 to 30-year-olds being kind of the median level, which is different from how we've seen interventions perhaps in education or in several other spaces. Just, I think, 2 more components of this. One is there is a fair amount of horizontal focus, not vertical focus. And by horizontal focus, we're really talking about saying people want to build a specific type of muscle that then can be used across spaces. There is a kind of counter argument that is growing, where a lot of organizations are starting to feel that we need to entrench people in issues that they care about, which is something that's being explored. And I think the final piece to really discuss here is that a lot of and this is something that we've talked about internally, is that almost 50% of the organizations have a national focus, and a lot of that is enabled through technology. And I think we'll be speaking about that at the CAS session tomorrow in detail. But Shraddha, let me hand back over to you to kind of talk about some of the forces.
Absolutely. So, like, we thought of these forces at 2 levels, right? Like, there are forces which are playing out in the individual context, and then there are some forces which are shaping the overall environment, the macro environment, so to speak. I'm going to just quickly run through like a couple of things that I thought were interesting to call out. One, we've already discussed, Anuriti's alluded to this, but like, I think we live in a world where like our positions are becoming more and more entrenched, and like we're moving to a world of binaries with very little or there's a lack of common ground. And I think Trina spoke to this very beautifully when we interacted with her, on saying it's not just like a difference of opinion, it's now become an intolerance of a difference of opinion, which I thought was very powerful. And the second trend, I think, technology, which has really disrupted both at an individual level. I live in Bangalore. I may not know my neighbors that well, but I am a part of many digital communities, whether it's for working mothers, whether it's for cooking, or whether it's for K-pop and K-drama. And therefore, like in this context, when let's say a lot of the active citizenship space has evolved from community organizing, from communities taking charge in this digital world that we inhabit, like what is a community kind of, that itself has started changing what it means to be in a community. And the second piece I want to call out is I think our definition of action is also changing. There's a lot of interesting research on clicktivism and slacktivism. And there's a very interesting quote that I would like to paraphrase, that by the very passive nature of how we click on a campaign, the essence of active citizenship or activism is kind of lost. And there's a lot of research coming out globally, at least, that people are signing up for campaigns and they may not even understand the issue, because like it's just that sense of I've done my bit, I have shared, like I've supported a cause, and that's kind of driving, let's say, a lot of the engagement. And I think we all saw this in COVID with the in like the large number of WhatsApp forwards that we were all, like I think, like we were all flooded with, in terms of what to do, what not to do. Every day there was a new nuska, a new therapy on what to try. And the third is, I think, at an individual level, there's just an implied trust deficit with the sarkar, and I think that's some muscle memory that has been built uh, over repeated interactions with the government system. And for example, whether it's why is my surname not different, why my surname is different from my husband's, and I've had that conversation with the passport office many times. Uh, and like that just takes some time to build, and also the fact that like some of these things take so long to happen, that like as a citizen or as an individual, it's really hard to kind of understand or see, like, where, if I even, let's say, contribute my time and effort, what will it lead to, right? So some of that still remains very hazy. The second thing, like on the institutional side, again, I think technologies played a huge role. It's made a lot of this work very accessible for many of us. And I think uh, here I want to talk to the fact that, like, let's say, for example, like the work that Civic is doing, right, where they are allowing citizens to participate and give feedback on bills. But the fact that a bill to a law takes about 2000 days in India is where, like, I think a lot of the drop off happens, and it becomes harder to figure out what is happening and how do I keep people engaged. The other thing I think I would like to speak to is funding. Again, this is coming from the convening, where like funding was the top, I would say, issue that almost all the 30 people who were in the room at the internal convening kind of brought up, on saying it's very hard. And that is kind of backed up by the fact that I think less than 1% of philanthropic money finds its way into democracy and citizenship work in India. And this is like driven by some, I think some of this is very structural, because increasingly philanthropy is being driven by measurable outcomes. And like we discussed, it is very, like, this sector is so complex. Like, what does an activate, who is an activated citizen? I think, like, we are going to come to that slide and you'll find that there's no one definition. What does he or she do? What does he or she look like? Where does he or she live? There's just no common answer to this. There's no linear pathway as well. Like, while we may have like some broad hairy goal of saying what we hope to achieve, but the pathways, they're just a multitude of ways in which we can get there. And the yeah and I actually got them, it would be good to hear from you also on some of these. I think we've like had a little bit of a back and forth, but I think it would be great for the audience also to kind of hear your thoughts and thinking on whether it's the non-binary piece of active citizenship, whether it's the non-linearity, anything that you would like to speak to.
Thanks, Shraddha. Very quickly, over the course of the last few years, as we've explored this work and worked with some amazing partners to understand what the components of this are. First, while there are many, just to focus on two, I think,
Have you lost Gautam?
no, I'm here.
Um,
Sorry, can you not hear me?
Shraddha, is Gautam audible for you?
Yeah, he's audible for me.
Okay.
So broadly, I think the bits that have really stood out is the diversity of options that every actor in the ecosystem has to be able to play this. So it's not you either do practice active citizenship or you don't. I think there's an entire space for it, and I think that's the part that to answer Nikhil's question that impact consulting firms and other organizations can think about. How do you enable information dissemination? How do you build help amplifying voices? How do you build networks? In a sense, how do you help Samaj mobilize better to solve problems as we saw during COVID? How do you enhance the ability for Samaj to make better claims of existing systems like the work that Indus Action does? And then, like the journey eGov is on, how do you help and support the sarkaar to serve better? I think broadly, these are some of the ideas that we've seen, and they're not linear in the sense that you don't have to start with one and then work your way up a ladder. You can choose any one of these. And the idea of the non-binary nature of active citizenship is that it's different at different points in time, and a citizen can choose to be active and engaged on particular problems, but not on all. And that for us was an important learning as well. The last one I think for us to really take away, was the role of what everyone can do. And I think for us, the idea of what Anurathi had mentioned of muscles was the fact that every organization can choose to build some of these muscles into their work. You don't have to do all of them, but building some of them into your work gives you a greater ability to engage not just with Samaj, but also more meaningfully to co-create some of the solutions to the problems that you tackle. So yeah, the idea that it's non-binary is that you can be engaged on some but not on all. The idea that it's non-linear was an interesting one for us because we've heard this ladder of engagement that you start in one place and then slowly move up, but it's not true. You can choose to engage very deeply on some things even though you haven't been, even though you have not necessarily on this ladder of engagement. I just want to hand over. If I see a couple of questions in the chat box, I think we've answered Nikhil's. There's one from Parikshit who says social media platforms are powerful platforms for active citizenship, and how do these networks play out in the scheme of things? Shraddha, do you want to? It came up, I know, in the research. You want to talk about that, and then we can.
Yeah. And Pariksha, that's like a very important conversation to have, I think, in the times that we live in. And there's a lot of research coming out, even globally, in terms of what has been the impact of social media in how we think of ourselves as citizens and how we engage and let's say mobilize as Samaj. And like I think there's like the positive sides obviously are immense, like I said, right? Like technology, some of these platforms have made so much of this work information so accessible for so many of us that like you cannot undermine the importance of these platforms. But then again, I think there's a growing epidemic around fake news. I think these are all forces, like I think these are some challenges that we are going to have to contend with or tackle. And there, I think globally at least there's, and even within India, I think there is a lot of conversation now on public commons when it comes to technology and social media. So I think those conversations will get louder, will get more rich as time moves on. But yeah, like I think like the sheer enablement that these platforms have provided, I think has been immense.
Parikshit, I heard this good analogy that you see social media is the beachhead and not the entire map. That you use social media to activate and bring people on, but it cannot be all of your work. that is a starting point and a foothold. There are a couple of other questions that I want to pull out from the chat. So one is, how do you assess progress being done by organizations in active citizenship? I'm happy to take a crack at it, but there's no good answer because it's not linear. It's one of those. It's one of those. It's one of those ideas where perhaps the process is the progress, because many of these challenges, the challenges you're trying to solve are not linear, and the pathways to resolve them are not linear as well. So the way we look at it is to be able to articulate the role of the. Anuradha, do you want to mute? Sorry, I think there's a bit of feedback coming from you. Thanks. So we try and articulate the role of the individual and the role of the systemic problem in which it's happening. And so long as we can very clearly see the pathway from the individual to the system, then it's a little bit of trusting in the process. And the one that we've come to see as so vital is iterating from what you learn. You can have a hypothesis as to how you can influence the system as a citizen, but feedback is important, and learning is important, and being able to iterate from what you're seeing and observing is very, very vital. I just want to pick up Shraddha, Anuruti, if you had any answers, I'll go through the questions.
Yeah, quickly, I just adding to what Gautam said, I think, and we have it in green on the slide that's on the screen as well, that I think this is one space, I think, where action is far greater than impact, because just by like taking that action also has a huge meaning, and like there's a development of agency, there's a development of voice, which is so critical to a lot of the work that we're doing across the development sector and in trying to tackle India's social problems. So yeah, like I think, and like when we were talking to portfolio organizations, when we were looking at research as well, I think just saying at what point do you consider somebody activated? Then like once they're activated, do they stay activated? And then activating to what end, right? Like there are no clear answers for any of these questions. And therefore, when you're trying to measure impact, then it becomes very tough if you don't know what success looks like, right? So yeah, just building on that.
Anuruti, did you have anything to add? You're on mute. You're on mute, Anuruti.
Hi, can you guys hear me?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. Okay. Yeah, while I still can. So I think there were two things that we heard. One was someone said this at the convening, which is what is an end state, right? There is no perfect ideal state that we're ever working towards. So I think that is a really powerful piece. The second is we've talked about this a lot internally, which is that there is almost a funnel that you can think of where the minute you move from asking people to do what Shraddha was saying, which is click on a link, to actually spending their time, there is a huge drop off. So I think for one of the organizations we'd spoken to, that number went from somewhere like 600,000 to people who click links to 3,000 to 4,000 who actually spend time. And I think these are some of the real challenges around, to your point in terms of how do we move forward.
Yeah, and I think Uttara makes a very interesting comment saying that a variety of organizations working with a multitude of stakeholders need to collaborate if we really need to see the needle shift. And I think Uttara, that speaks to what has come out for us as well, saying that this is not like this is not like a vertical, so it's not like education or health or let's say wash. This is actually a horizontal, and none of the work that we are seeing in any of these sectors would be successful if, let's say, communities did not take ownership of their problems and like assert their voice or their rights as citizens. And we've seen this like this participatory or collaborative problem solving time and again in different sectors, whether it's the school management committees in education, or it's Kudumshri in Kerala, or even the ward committees that are active now in many of our cities. So these are all, like, I think fantastic examples of how, people, everyday people of India, everyday people like you and I can come together and are showing up day after day for our communities.
Um, while we take the last couple of questions, what I'd love is for everyone, if they just want to put into the chat something they learned from the session today or questions they would like answered in some point in time in the future. So, Nikhil, to your question on did you come across any forms of active citizenship where the engagement got embedded into Samaj? If you look at, for example, the idea of in Karnataka, what they call the katte, which is the common meeting space or meeting ground for conversations. In a way, that is something that we care deeply about, right? The idea that there are common spaces where everyone can talk about their hopes and aspirations and understand each other's interests, so that we can move forward, breaking the binaries. Many of these practices existed. I mean, part of the research is Gandhi's idea of the village as a self-organizing unit is very, very powerful in terms of active citizenship. Perhaps some of our work is really to tap back into these ideas and practices that we had but have lost. Dhananjay has a question about, are there certain states or geographies versus others where where the idea of active citizenship is more rooted? I will say that we have a little bit of a bias towards a more urban context in this work, but that's the limitations of our limitations, not that of the work. I'm sure it's vibrant, and the research will throw up more of that's happening outside of urban centers. Samir has a question. Samir has a question on, do people underside the upsides of participation, especially nth order ones? Um, yeah, Samir, I'm not sure I fully understood the question, but if it's around the fact, do people not fully value what participation does? My answer is yes, people don't, because it's a very powerful tool for co-creation, for self-actualization, and for ownership. I mean, all three of them, right? I mean, if you participate in the co-creation of a solution, you take both moral obligation and responsibility, but a sense of some sort of sense of ownership in that. So we'd just love to hear from Shraddha and Anurati on that. And again, just to say, if you guys want to throw comments into the chat box on what you might take away from this conversation and bits that are still unclear, we'll use that to iterate for future pieces of knowledge.
Yeah. So I think just Gautam, just speaking to that point on, does it differ across states? We haven't like really arrived at an answer to this, but what we did see is that there is some correlation between like the trust between the citizens and the government. So I think it does speak to that element. So where you will like states where you tend to see a very high incumbency factor, you will see some of these constructs playing out very differently. So that I think from a geography context we did see. And there was one more question, Gautam. I think you had wanted us to answer.
One was certain geographies and states in which there's more visible active citizenship. There was one on, have we seen active citizenship become embedded into Samaj, where the organization is no longer required? And then Samir's question on what's it called, the upsides of participation. If you all want to touch upon
Yeah.
any of those briefly, and
I
then
think RTI is a brilliant example of where, let's say, what was, let's say, MKSS, what was a movement from Samaj, which is now embedded. Like all of us as citizens know that it is our right, and we can file an RTI. There are a lot of organizations that are helping us to do that, but like it is something that is available to us. I think in the research that we came across, and just speaking to the saying benefits of participation, in the research that we came across that it does have instrumental benefit to you as an individual, and there's obviously benefit to your communities, and there's benefit to like just participating in democracy as a whole. But even for an individual, there are benefits in terms of, like there's a strong correlation between how active you are in your communities and social capital, and then social capital further has a direct linkage to success as well.
Thank you, Shraddha. In the interest of time, we're running very, very tight sessions. We're going to wrap up now. I want to thank Anurati and Shraddha for bringing the learnings they've been distilling and synthesizing for a month now. Over the course of the next few weeks, we'll be able to publish this. And I'm sure we'll find a way to get it out to all of you. Thank you for being such an engaged and active audience. If there are questions we weren't able to answer, or things that we have missed and you would like to talk to us about, we'd love to stay in touch. There's a contact button on somewhere on AirMeet, as well as on our website. Thank you, everyone, and we'll see you. Look forward to seeing many of you in this course of the 8 sessions we have planned over the next 3 days. Thank you.
Any chance, Yash, that we could look at the video? We have, I think, 5 minutes.
No.